Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. I'm Task Force Bourbon. Today we have something very special in store. We're going to be doing a double oaked flight fight. What you see before you is a variety of double oak offerings that are out in the bourbon community right now. And we'll go over first what double oak is, how charring affects bourbon, why double oak is a thing, and we'll figure out, is it worthwhile? And if so, which of the major offerings that are out right now are my personal preference and maybe yours as well. So what we have today is Old Forester 1910. We have Woodford Reserve Double Oaked. This is a store select from Total Wine. We have Jim Beam Double Oaked. And we have the beloved 2021 release Kentucky Peerless Double Oaked as well. So I'm going to set these aside for now. And we'll get to the blind fight you see before you. I have these cards behind them, which tell me which bourbons they are, but I don't know what they are. Neither do you, but we'll figure that out. I'm going to move these just like so out of the way so I don't accidentally flip them over. But we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm going to move these together so they're a bit more in frame. So like is normal for me, I'm going to start out with a little bit of history. And as it pertains to what charring is and what bourbon really is. 50% to 80% of bourbon gets their flavor from being matured in that charred barrel. First of all, one, it has to legally do so to be considered bourbon. It has to touch the inside of a new charred oak, American oak barrel. That can literally be for 1 second, but typically you're not going to see something less than 2 years being named a straight bourbon, or 4 years if it meets other requirements on top of being bottled and bond. But other than that, there really is no age requirement as long as it touches the inside of that barrel for even one millisecond, really. But it wouldn't produce a good bourbon, right? And that's because what happens in that bourbon takes time, and that time is only one factor, with the char level being the other. So what we'll do is we'll try to break that down just a little bit and focus on the char side of the house. Fortunately, whiskey barrel science is concerned with a small group of compounds. There's the cellulose, which creates a tight bond, but it doesn't really react with the whiskey itself. We got hemicellulose, lignin, tannins, and oak lactones. And to the extent to which you char a barrel will have an impact on those last four most specifically. The hemicellulose is one of the most important compounds or components of the American oak. When exposed to high levels of heat, that's about 284 degrees Fahrenheit and above, hemicellulose will break down into wood sugars, allowing for some caramelization on the interior surface of the barrel. Also very important is oak lignin. That's a fiber within the wood. It breaks down into flavor molecules like eugenol, which gives you that spiced clove flavors, and more famously vanillin, which, surprise, surprise, gives you some of the vanilla flavors. There's a lot of other chemical compounds within bourbon that give us the flavors, but again, all those come from this part of the char and the barrel process. The more a barrel is charred, the more the lignin yields flavor molecules. There's also tannins. All right, but well before the oak barrel is charred, even the oak itself is what they call seasoned, and that's allowed to dry out. Oftentimes, they just leave it outside in the elements to get rid of those harsher tannins. But those left over are essential for successful long-term maturation. The higher the char, the mellower the interaction between spirit and tannin. Right? Tannins aren't something we love, right? So this helps remove some of that process or aspects. And then there are the oak lactones. All right? They're compounds present in many species of oak tree, but they're higher volume in American oak, and they're responsible for the woody / coconut flavors you'll find in many bourbons. The higher the char, the less the impact of oak lactones. Charred barrels also have one other cool attribute that they lend to the process, and is that essentially the carbon in the ash acts as a filter for the harsher elements of the liquor, like sulfur compounds, for example, found in younger whiskeys. Essentially, it removes impurities. So the longer a bourbon will stay in a barrel, depending on the weather, moving in and out of those oak staves, that really helps, that whole process from flavor molecules to removing impurities, et cetera, et cetera. But it does also come down to those char levels. And so at the cooperage, those levels can range. They typically range level 1 through level 4, with 4 being nicknamed the alligator char. But that level and makeup of char, because sometimes they'll do a couple of different ones, and when you get into like the double oak, maybe they do level 1 or level 2 char, and then they age it in a level 3 or level 4 char, etc. But number 4 level isn't actually the highest. You see something like Buffalo Trace's experimental line, they've done something as high as a number 7. That's basically all but burning the barrel completely to ash itself. So 1 is 15 seconds char, number 2 is 30 seconds, number 3 is 35 seconds, and again 4, being the alligator char, is 55 seconds. The bonus of the alligator char is that those deep fissures that it creates also allow the spirit to seep back and forth in the interior of the wood, which creates more reaction with the uncharred oak. Char layers that, you know, they range from about 1/8 to 1/4 inch deep. But I do have a wood stave here from a 53 gallon, right? That's your standard issue size oak barrel. This is one of the staves. Flip it on the inside. Try not to, well, I do have lids, but you can see maybe somewhat, without breaking the bottle, see kind of how it looks pretty wild there, right? And then it actually, in fact, if you just sit there and just rub this, I just see a flake just rubbed off, black, right? So that your barrel is sitting on the inside of that for a while, doing its thing, and then you turn it onto its side, and you'll have what they call the red line. You can see that kind of right there. I got the light kind of bouncing off, but let me back it up. See that kind of red line right here? That's where it had reached within that oak stave, how deep it had got over the time that it was sitting there. That barrel is brought to you courtesy of Bluegrass Distillers. So shout out to those guys. They're doing great things over there. I love them. So do seek them out if you're ever in Kentucky. They're definitely a small craft distiller, but nonetheless are doing great stuff. Anyways, moving on. So all of what I said makes it sound like a higher char is better, right? Not necessarily the case, right? Essentially, your spirit will definitely take on a darker color, right, inside of a barrel with a higher level char. Think of the spirit equivalent to a dark roast coffee. All right, a higher char yields liquor that's big and bold with loads of toasted notes and smoky aromas. However, there is a trade-off because the intensity of a deeper char can mean less complexity. It can mean that. Doesn't mean that it does mean that, because compounds like lactones degrade with a longer burn time. It depends on your personal preference. So that's what it boils down to. What do you like? Okay, so what is double oaked? Right, so we talked about what bourbon is and how the charring affects, because when we say something like double oak, we're concentrating on how do we make bourbon, which is so regulated, has to follow all these regulations, and we can, how do you break out and do something different? Okay, and so you've got one of those ways is to double oak age a bourbon. So the idea is simple: age bourbon distillate in charred white oak barrels as usual, like we just discussed. Then rinse and repeat in a newly freshly charred oak barrel, without the rinsing, of course. Okay. Key word though you're looking for there is charred. You're not looking for toasted. You can look for toasted then charred, right? It doesn't. You can add to the rules, but you can't take away, right? That's what we say, back in my military days, right? And when you look at something like that, and we'll talk about toasted bourbons. Here's a good example of a prime example of a toasted bourbon. It says right smack dab on there, toasted barrel. Right, that's because it's its own separate thing. It's not a double barrel. It's been aged in 2 different barrels, but it's not a double oaked bourbon. So that goes into what we don't consider, right? We don't consider that. We don't consider finished bourbons a double oaked, right? Even though, again, it's been aged in a second barrel. And finishing is not a new concept. It's actually developed in Scotland, and it usually relies on old barrels that were aged in other alcohol barrels such as sherry, rum, port, Madeira, whatever. And again, that's not what we would call double oaked. The first documented American bourbon going twice into what we are now referring to as a double oak bourbon started back in 1910. This is the oldest documented case of a bourbon, and this is what we have here before us. I'm not going to spoil everything until I get to it, but essentially it was first pioneered when there was a bottling plant fire that they had, and they were forced to rebottle them. Right. In fact, Brown Forman, who's the parent company of Old Forester, who's also the parent company of Woodford Reserve, which is just something we know and love as a double oak offering, used this technique when they first launched Woodford Reserve Double Oaked back in 2012, and this is now the first major and probably still one of the most major sustained releases in this category. But more of that later. Let me move this aside. So one side note about age statements on double oak bourbons real quick. So the Tax Trade Bureau, TTB, right, proposed to incorporate its current policy that only the time in the first oak barrel counts towards the age of the distilled spirit. So that is, if spirits are aged in more than one oak barrel, for example, if a whiskey is aged 2 years in a new charred oak barrel and then placed into a second new charred oak barrel for an additional 6 months, only the time in the first barrel is counted in the age statement on the label. So what we'll do here is we'll go into the Old Forester 1910 real quick. So Old Forester 1910 is, while technically a non-age dated bourbon, it's set at 93 proof. Old Forester 1910 is the fourth and final expression in the Whiskey Row series, which are intended to showcase the history and development of their whiskey. All right, is everybody tuned in? I'm getting some feedback that I might be having some latency issues. All right, so I get a thumbs up if from anyone, maybe if I'm looking good. Everybody can hear me? All right. Does everything look okay? All right, thanks TD415X. I'm going to continue on then. All right, I got it slightly lagging from Ginger Noonan. All right, but I'm going to try to continue on. So again, this is the fourth of their Whiskey Row series. It was launched back in 2014, and that consists of 3 others, of course. Good now. Thanks, Frank. Spear 19. Old Forester 1870, the original batch, what they nicknamed that. Old Forester 1897, Bottle and Bond. And Old Forester 1920 Prohibition Style. It's a personal favorite of mine. All right. Pretty much all the Brown-Forman whiskeys, thanks TD415X, pretty much all the Brown-Forman whiskeys start from the same grain bill. That's 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley. This one, again, while non-age dated, is approximately 4 years old, other than the straight appellation that it has on it. Following the first aging process and paying homage to the 1910 bottling plant fire, the whiskey is transferred to a second barrel where it ages for an additional period of time before being bottled. So I got to read up real quick that I'll read from Brown-Forman about 1910. And, quote, 1910 Old Fine Whiskey, which is what its name's called, represents a specific point in Old Forester's nearly 150-year-old history. In October 1910, a fire caused the bottling line to be shut down for an indefinite period of time. Complicating matters, there was a vat of mature whiskey waiting to be bottled, otherwise facing ruin. The whiskey was instead stored in a new charred oak containers to rest until the line could be repaired. End quote. This double barreling was the first such documented of its kind and led to the gaining the name Old Fine Whiskey. In order to reproduce 1910, standard Old Forester has undergone a second barreling in a lightly toasted, heavily charred, keyword there, barrel. Mature Old Forester enters a second barrel at 100 proof, just as it did back in 1910, said Old Forester master taster Jackie Zykin. The second barrel is charred nearly to the point of incineration. So obviously they're trying to emulate the plant fire there. Old Forester 1910 goes into a second heavily charred barrel to 100 proof. The brand says it was done that way in 1910 because at that proof, whiskey can be barreled up to 125 proof, by the way, means the liquid can absorb more of the wood sugars, creating a sweeter, richer final product. Campbell Brown, the president of Old Forester, says, I find with the Whiskey Row, they all kind of hit you differently, but 1910 is a favorite because it's so different from any other Old Forester. I just find it fun how we can manipulate the barrel and the char and the toast, and within 7 to 9 months, we can influence the flavor so dramatically. It just blows my mind. It's so much darker and just such a rich chocolatey cherry, right? So that's from the president of Old Forester. I'm super excited. I don't know which one this is, but, maybe if I get chocolate cherry, I'm going to, have something spoiled for me, perhaps. All right, so up next is I got Kentucky Peerless Double Oak. This is a little less accessible, unfortunately. You can get it, from the distillery time to time, but it's got a cool little history behind it. So it started out essentially as a way to rescue whiskey from leaking barrels. All right. When a barrel leak that can't be repaired, the whiskey is transferred into a new charred oak barrel. By exposing the whiskey to a second barrel, the whiskey develops that new complexity, which we know to be the double oak thing. Over the years, Peerless has rebarreled the whiskey inside their leaky barrels and later released these barrels as a special one-off release. So we got a quote here from the master distiller, Caleb Kilburn. He says, with the amazing response to our very limited double oak program to date, we have decided to improve the quality and accessibility of the product. Where in the past we would leave things up to chance, we are now intentionally curating bottles to become double oak. That's really the so what for that bottle. Now moving over back to Woodford Reserve, double oaked here. Again, this is a store pick from Total Wine, but it's a 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% malted barley, non-age stated, 90.4 proof. Double oaked is the same bourbon as their regular Woodford Reserve that's been given a second maturation or finish in barrels that have been toasted twice as long. So they use that word toasted, but in actuality they're charred twice as long, but charred much more lightly than the other casks for an additional 9 months. All right, this is probably the gold standard in the community as it pertains to double oaked. And then last but certainly not least, because I heard this is a sleeper, this is like 20 to 25 bucks. Jim Beam. This is Jim Beam White, essentially, but double oaked. So it's 77% corn, 13% rye, and 10% malted barley, bottled at 86 proof. The standard Jim Beam, white label, right? Same mash bill, everything, same 4-ish years, but it takes that second barrel ride for an undisclosed period of time. The release for Jim Beam double oak states, quote, and age for a second time to taste. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. We're going to taste these bourbons. I have them here, right? And we're going to find out which is what, hopefully at some point, but better, more than that, we're going to figure out which is the best. All right, so I'm going to go in line order here, and then I'll mix it up a few times, but it's going to take me probably a little bit here. So if you got these 4 bourbons, or 3 and maybe something else, feel free to pull them out, and we can do this together, guys. Okay, so whatever's in this glass, first of all, you can see it's definitely much darker than the second. I don't want to, cheat, but you can probably tell this is probably in the higher end of the bourbons. And if I just give it a little spin around in the glass here, it's got some nice viscosity to it. Clean. I don't see any floaties, so maybe it's a chill filtered, I don't know. But on the nose, really rich. A lot of thick caramel, thick creme brulees, vanilla with some sort of like a toasted vanilla. This is really rich on the nose, and my favorite part is figuring out what's on the palate. So let's go ahead and take our first sip, y'all. Actually, the body is definitely doesn't match the aroma. This is a medium bodied pour, while full of complexity. I was expecting this thick barrel proof kind of deal here, and that's not what I necessarily got. I do get some complexities. Right up front, it starts really kind of on the lighter side. You get your standard issue vanilla stuff. But the oak, it's gentle. It's not obnoxious. This is pretty good. So you got on the mid some fruit going on. It's not I don't think it's a berry. Maybe it's like a dark apple. I almost, actually, I said it's not a berry, but maybe I get some blackberry pie or something like that going on. One more sip and I'm going to move on because I don't want to spend all day with this one. The finish, I actually just got it on the back. There's a bit of grain going on. But it's still balanced, but it's a touch on the grainy side on the end. So I don't know. That's not my favorite part, but this is a really good pour. I'm gonna guess somewhere. Well, I guess they all are 90-something proof. So what do we have here? Woodford Reserve, like I said, is 90.4. Yep. This is 93 proof. It says it right there. Stab Smack 86 proof. And Kentucky Peerless is what? 107.4, 107.4 proof. So I guess they're not really circling in terms of being at the same proof levels, but actually not at all really. Okay, so this nose, you can see right at the bat, I hate to try to take the guessing game and fun out of it, but I'm going to guess right out the bat, just a sheer color alone. This is probably the Jim Beam. This looks a lot lighter. I mean, look at that compared to I don't know, maybe this one's probably the darkest. I don't want to mix the cups up here, but look at the difference. Look how dark that is. You got this like gold amber, you know, like really thin honey compared to like a really thick, almost molasses type kind of, you know, right out of a tree kind of deal going on. Right. On the nose, it's super light, but you do get some grains. And you do get wood. This is the Jim Beam. I hate to spoil the fun, but I can tell. I'm going to get, if this is not the Jim Beam, then you know what? This will be a huge upset. But this is super light bodied. And I'm not a super big fan. I love the Jim Beam premium stuff, like Booker's, for example. Big fan. Knob Creek, you know, when you get to, you know, higher HA like 12 and 15 and maybe beyond, hopefully we'll see with the 18. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of their like white label or, you know, some of their lower end offerings. I did like the single barrel 107. I thought that was okay. It was all right. But if this is in fact, I don't get a lot of peanuts, which is a very common thing for the Jim Beam. You get something green, something grainy. But maybe it's because it's so low proof that it's just super, super balanced. There's nothing astringent here, which you would think if this is, right, it might not be, what would be a $20 bottle, you'd think this would be pretty terrible actually, but it's not. And there's nothing really bad in terms of like, you would think you might see some balance issues or whatever else, but maybe some of those tannins are still in there because it's on the younger side of the aging process, but none of those things are true for this. There's a touch of caramel at the start. Like you got a caramel flavor at the beginning. None of the body of a caramel. You get some of that vanilla. You get no baking spices. You get, again, maybe a touch of the green grainy stuff. But it's not bad. It's not bad. So far, this is the winner. I'm going to keep these. I'm going to try to push these up in order so I can keep track. Because I do have 4 bourbons. I'm going to drink all of this, by the way. Quick rinse. All right. Glass number 3. So TD415X says, this is a sweet sweat for me. Haven't cracked Peerless yet. Crack it, brother. You know, bourbon's definitely meant to be drank in my book. I'm a big fan of the regular Peerless. I got 3 single barrels from them. I listed the Peerless Double Oak as my number 10 bourbon of the 2021 year. Drink it. All right, so Ginger Noonan's trying some as well alongside. So she says slight tobacco notes on this one for me. Yeah, I'm referring to the second glass, I imagine. I could definitely get that, like more of it's set in a lot of sun. I skipped the nose, but this. That smells like I just stuck my head into a barrel. And not like a harsh oak, but like a nice soft, but man, I walked into a rick house with this. Man, that is all oak in the best way possible. So this has some of those initial, some rye going on at the beginning. A nice, sweet, smoky oak that starts on the front, carries through the mid, lingers on the finish, but on the finish, it's like, what am I thinking about here? Man, I almost spilled that. What is that on the finish? It's this really cool thing going on. It's like I got the word tobacco in my head. Like I keep saying stuff like creme brulee, but it's not rich like a brown sugar, like a creme brulee or something like that. But it's got this really cool. One more sip. Oh, okay. It's like a smoky maple syrup. I got a flavor wheel. I recommend you use it if you get stuck like you just saw me get stuck. But there is some tobacco. There is, maybe I could say coffee, like a honeyed coffee, and it's got all the rich flavors, right? This one actually tastes a bit more on the rich side, the glass one. This one has those flavors but isn't rich. This is oaky, like a nice approachable oak with some rich flavors going on. Something really cool in the end I've yet to pinpoint. Maybe it's a pecan, like a smoked pecan. I don't know, I'm gonna figure this out in a minute. But I think still I'm gonna put glass one, then now glass three, then this is probably gonna fit behind the rest. I'm not a super big fan of glass two. Where am I set this? All right, do a quick rinse and move on to the final glass. TDX 415X. Wow, cheers to that, brother, man. Cheers. Wow. All right, this is a good nose. And it's so weird because you go from nice, rich flavors, nothing at all. Oh, actually, grain. So rich flavors, grain, oak, like a nice, cool, wet, seasoned oak. And what I get? It's like a mix between glass one and glass three. It's like both. I'm going to go on a limb. You know what I'm going to guess? Stay with me, guys. Let me take one sip and then I'm going to guess. This is good. This goes glass one, glass two, glass three, glass four, I think. This is my first round. I'm going to do a couple rounds. But I think it's glass one, glass four, glass three, glass two. I think. Now, on glass four, it's a mix. It's like 1 and 3 had a baby. It's got some of those rich flavors, but it's still a bit oaky, and it's super well balanced, and it's set at a really nice proof for this. Yeah. You get some kind of berry, maybe like a dark berry, a touch cocoa, some oak, obviously. And it's just like this really well balanced throughout. Normally you've got this open, the mid, the finish, and they all got maybe its own thing going on, but this is all consistent profile throughout. I bet this is Task Force Bourbon's first guess. This is Old Forester 1910. This is Jim Beam. This is Kentucky Peerless, and this is Woodford Reserve. That's my guess. Who knows? I might be wrong, and that's the fun of it. But so I really think it's a fight between glass 1 and glass 4. So I'm going to take a rinse and I'm going to do glass 1 and 4. I kind of just like what's going on with the more bolder flavors. It's not as well balanced as glass 4 by a long shot. And it starts out as cool, flavorful, rich, and oak balance, and then it finishes into maybe it's irons them out a bit, but it's more of it's like a medium body to more of a fuller kind of body at the end. But it does concentrate, which those will balance out of whack a bit more on the oak. What I do say about all 4, and I think this is where the double oak piece comes in, is 1, there's an oak presence there. Now that's going to be true, for most bourbons, writ large. but there's more of a nice oak profile. Not like you find on a 20-year Pappy where you get this like kind of wet, earthy, cardboard, in a good way, flavor going on, and not like you get in a toasted barrel where you guys like it's really rich, sugary, kind of sweet, and then you get this nice toasted bit. And in the metaphor I use like a marshmallow, right? So you can just one or two people when it comes to cooking marshmallows. Well, I guess 3 if you eat it raw. But number 1 is the guys and gals who will sit there and toast it perfectly, just inches away, and they'll take 3 minutes, 5 minutes to cook the perfect, get the nice golden brown hue going on, and they'll put it and eat it. And there's a third person like me who I'm like shoving the fire, and I want to see it black, right? I want to see it bubbling black, and then just peel it off, and that's me. I'm probably gonna get cancer because of it, but so that's how I equate toasted compared to like a charred inside of a barrel anyways. All right, so now I got 1. Let me try 4 again. Man, I don't know. Oh my God. It's the clear winners. And then it's this. It's like close behind, then this guy. But I go back and forth. It's almost like, apples and oranges or whatever. Like I want, I could see these tying in different days of the week, depending on how I feel about, what I'm preferring. But, man, let me put it back in order. All right, gotta do this again. I'm sorry, guys. One more time. All right, let's start with 4 this time. It's chocolatey. There's honey, brown sugar, but nothing just pops out. It's like I'm trying to be the gray man here, but I'm still toppish of the class. I just don't want to get called out, and be the person I get voluntold to do stuff, because I'm the number 1 person in class all the time. But I'm actually the smartest kid in class, kind of deal going on here. But everything's muted. It's like it's hiding behind this curtain of something. But in a way that really works well. And then let's go back to 1 real quick. This is more oak heavy with more predominant flavors. Man, I don't know, because I'm gonna look like an idiot here in a second because I have my one that I think I'm gonna end up liking. I think I'm gonna choose 1910, and I've only had it one time a long time ago, but I'm a huge fan of Old Forester. So if I don't guess Old Forester, I'm gonna have a little shock face going on. Let me try 3. Maybe 3's gonna jump out now. Okay. So this is good, but there's just nothing. This is really good, but it's not gonna beat these 2. So, all right, 1 last time. We'll go 1 and 4. This is really, really good, but I don't know. Maybe the characters aren't standing out, but. Maybe the balance is what's getting me. So, maybe the Old Forester, love that I have is going to mess me up here because I'm expecting stuff to stand out. Maybe I'm, influenced because I've thought that maybe this first glass was Old Forester, but one. All right, I had a quick technical, issue flash on the screen there. So are we still good? I don't want to spoil the reveal here, the best part. All right, thumbs up if we're good. It's good now, great. You're back. All right, thanks TD14X and Ginger Noonan. Glass 1. What's that say? Oh my goodness. Glass 1's Kentucky Peerless? Oh wow. Okie dokie. Glass 1's Kentucky Peerless. That's a shock. Glass 2, this shouldn't be a shock. Let's see. Jim Beam Double Oak. Glass 2's Jim Beam Double Oak. Glass, not a surprise. Glass 3. Woodford Reserve Double Oak. That's a shock. That leaves Old Forester as Glass 4, 1910. So, I am completely shocked that this is number 2 of the lineup, Kentucky Peerless. So, let's bring these back. I'll line them up for you. Holy crap. I can't believe that happened. Old Forester 1910 was my number 1. And then it was Kentucky Peerless Double Oak is number 2. And then it was Woodford Reserve Double Oak is number 3. Make sure it fits in. And then number 4, we got the Jim Beam following very much so behind the rest. But, I had heard that Jim Beam was going to be a sleeper, one that, if you like these, Double Oak thing going on, where it's at, you can get it. I think it's still a great bourbon, for where it sits, but it's not beating the rest of these guys at all. I think you can't go wrong with the 3 that are on the table at all. What I will say though, apparently, is the Woodford Reserve was fine and dandy, but I really came down to these 2 guys. Those 2 were the ones that fought it out. And I think, so this was Glass 1 and Glass 4, so let's put it in that way. So Glass 1 and Glass 4, right, they were in a constant fight with one another. And Glass 1 had some richness there without some of the balance there that just didn't convince me today. 1910 stood out to me because it had said balance while having the right flavor notes there. So I could be convinced, that these would go back and forth depending on the day of the week, but for today, 1910 is going to take the W, and Kentucky Peerless is going to be very close behind. It's a photo finish behind one another with, while there was a bit of distance maybe for Woodford Reserve coming in 3rd, I don't think it was ever going to take the 2nd place. And then poor old, he gets a thanks for showing up trophy. Sorry, Jim Beam. I love your other stuff, guys. Big time. So keep doing that. Keep doing that stuff. I think maybe what the problem here is, first of all, I think it could be helped a lot with being non-chill filtered. I think 86 proof is just too low for someone like myself. I think that if it was somewhere around 100 proof, non-chill filtered, and maybe aged a couple more years, this would be a serious badass. TD415X said, nice review, brother. Got the 1920, 1910, will be on the shelf soon. So I'm actually planning on doing the 1910 and the, let me pull it up. I have all kinds of bottles sitting back here. I gotta dig. All right. And the 1920. I'm going to do the 1915, tater train or not, if you want to call it that, but I'm going to go ahead and do the mix, the 50-50 split, and make the People's Blend 1915. That'll be in a video to follow soon, so, make sure you tune in for that. Now, what I like to do at the very end of these videos is, we have a great selection of all bourbons, so we'll go ahead real quick, and we're going to just throw them all together and see what we get. So we have Kentucky Peerless Double Oak going into some Jim Beam Double Oak. Ugh. Then we have Woodford Reserve Double Oak going into whatever you would call that. And then you have some Old Forester 1910 going to whatever you would call all the rest of that. All right. So do not try this at home. Just kidding. Go ahead. Definitely try this at home. Bourbon's meant to be drank. It's meant to have fun with. Meant to be shared. But I can only fit one person on the screen, and so right now I'm drinking with you all. All right. So when we mix all these four, then let me make sure it gets a good stir. Yep. Well, no surprise. You're going to get a lot of rich flavors on that, but you do get a bit of that grain, that Jim Beam maybe, and I think, what was it, the Kentucky Peerless I said had a touch of the grain going on. They're coming through on the nose. Holy crap. This is really good. You get a lot of palm, pear kind of fruits going on, really, really approachable. You get some of the nuts, the almonds kind of going on. You don't really get much of that grain. You get this like nice rich caramel, but none of the thickness of a caramel. And then it finishes off with like this really healthy dose of like the double aged oak. So I would rate this mixture, whatever's in this glass, out of a 5.0 rating scale with a 0.5 increment, probably at a 4.5. This is really good. So I hope you guys liked it. We now know what to look for on the shelf if you're interested in trying, sampling, drinking the whole bottle of a double-aged bourbon. If you find something else that you might have liked better than the rest of these, send that my way. I'd be really interested in hearing your feedback. Barring any last-minute questions or comments, I'd be happy to field any of those now. Other than that, if there aren't any, cheers.